Hello again, everybody. This is Steve Kallas, speaking of sports, and I'm here with Anthony Sorbellini of WestchesterCountyPost.com. And we're here to talk about a general overview of the NFL for about the last 10 days or so. And obviously, the biggest thing was the draft, but there were some other big stories. The first thing I want to talk about is the uproar, if you will, made over the fact that the Green Bay Packers moved up from number 30 in the first round to number 26 to select a quarterback. And that quarterback was Justin Love of Utah State. Now, there's a real split in the scouts on Justin Love. Some say, without question, he's got the strongest arm in the draft. And others say he's just not that good, and he should have been a day two selection as opposed to a first round selection. And then, of course, the wild card now is, how does Aaron Rodgers feel? How would he react? What is the Green Bay front office doing? Couldn't they have gotten him another weapon? There were, 8 good receivers in the draft. So what were they doing? Anthony Sorbellini, give me your thoughts on Justin Love and Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers.
Well, I mean, the Packers are kind of being realistic. Aaron Rodgers, he's not young anymore. He's getting up there. He's definitely had the injury history. I can't even tell you how many injuries he's had. So they're kind of just doing what they did with Brett Favre and getting ready to groom him. Now, Justin Love's not going to be starting right away. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers still, in my opinion, probably has about 3 to 5 really good years left in him. Definitely 3 really, really good years. But then those last 1 or 2 years or so could be a little tricky. But they're just grooming. They're gonna do exactly what they did when they drafted Aaron Rodgers. When they had Aaron sit behind Brett Favre for, I believe it was 3-4 years, something like that. So they're gonna do the exact same thing. It's in no rush. The Packers are still in a great spot, making the NFC Championship game last year. So they're kind of they know that the time's gonna come. So it's a matter of time.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Justin Love actually had a better year 2 years ago in 2018 than he did in 2019. He threw 17 interceptions, which led the FBS. He had the most interceptions of all the football bowl subdivision teams. He also, I saw a stat where against man-to-man coverage, he completed only 45.7% of his passes, and that was the 8th worst completion percentage in the FBS. So he's got some holes he has to fill. But I think what's even more interesting is this is the first time that the Packers have drafted a skill position player, not just a quarterback, a skill position player in the first round since 2005. And you know who they drafted in 2005? Aaron Rodgers. So it's pretty interesting. But, to some degree, now, Brett Favre came out with a statement yesterday where he said, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to finish his career somewhere else. And as you pointed out off camera, Brett Favre played somewhere else, and Peyton Manning played somewhere else, and Tom Brady is now playing somewhere else. If you go way back, Joe Namath played somewhere else. Johnny Unitas played somewhere else. Joe Montana more recently. So you're talking about the greatest of the great quarterbacks of all time. So that wouldn't be a surprise, but I really don't see Aaron Rodgers is one of the 3 most talented quarterbacks in the history of football. I know he's only got 1 Super Bowl, but, in today's game, if you have 1, if you have 2, you're Eli Manning's a Hall of Famer because he has 2, and nobody would ever say he's a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers. So I think on the one hand, it's kind of weird, and I think it's bad for the Packers and for Aaron Rodgers because they could have gotten a receiver. He needs some weapons. And they're going to have to outscore. Their defense played good, especially towards the end of the year. But to get to the next level, they're going to have to be able to put more points on the board. And I think they lost an opportunity to get some good receivers. And I think they gave that up. So I can understand why there's tension there. But I think as the reality, as you said, there's no way Justin Love steps in this year or next year, assuming there is a next year. This year, I mean. He's not going to take Aaron Rodgers' place until Aaron Rodgers can't play anymore. The other thing that entered my mind is maybe in the GM's mind, not in the coach's mind, but in the GM's mind, maybe there's a little Jimmy Garoppolo here. Aaron Rodgers getting a little older, like Tom Brady was getting to be 38, 39. I think Rodgers is 36 or gonna be 36. And maybe there's a thought he's going to tail off. But, a lot of these modern day quarterbacks, Brady at the lead, Drew Brees, Brady going to be 43, Drew Brees is 40. They just seem to play longer now for whatever reason, nutrition or whatever. I don't see how he's really a threat. As you said, maybe 3 or 4 years from now, we'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the waiting game of it, too. I mean, this whole kind of draft, I mean, you spoke about it, too, with, there's plenty of receivers. I mean, I want to touch base, too, like kind of, I mean, I'm gonna flaunt my Colts bias a little bit. Surprisingly, I'm a New York kid who's a big Indianapolis Colts fan, but I mean, the Colts went out. They knew they needed receivers. They needed somebody to help. Now the newly added Philip Rivers, and they went out. They got a stud receiver, but if you look at that, they picked him up. I want to say it was the second pick in the second round. I know it was early second round, but that was a pick that was right there for the Packers. So if you look where you want to surround Aaron Rodgers, especially now more so than ever when he's getting older in age, you want to get him those weapons quick, which is kind of what I think has enabled Drew Brees to be as productive as he has been.
Yeah, so other than the first 3 quarterbacks and the first 6 picks, which we'll talk about briefly later, Justin Love, for some reason, became the story of the first round. And really all the tension, maybe not. Rodgers called him and was nice to him. Rodgers has said all the right things. Mm-hmm. Even going back 6 months ago, he said, maybe they'll draft a quarterback. But again, Aaron Rodgers is still great. It's not like he's tailing off. So that was the story of the first round. Equally surprising to me, the story of the second round was with the 53rd pick in the draft. The Philadelphia Eagles took Jalen Hurts. Now, you say Carson Wentz just signed like a 4-year, $128 million contract. But since Nick Foles left, they really didn't have a good backup. And whatever you think of Carson Wentz, he gets hurt pretty much every year, including the first quarter of the first playoff game he played after being the quarterback of a team that made the playoffs 3 years in a row, including a Super Bowl victory. So I think part of it is Jalen Hurts, the story. He did really well at Alabama, but they took him out and put Tua in to win one national championship. But then he came back when Tua got hurt and played great. Transferred to Oklahoma, was number 2 in the Heisman voting last year, took Oklahoma to the Final Four. I think, unfortunately for Oklahoma, it was really a Final 3, and they needed a 4th team. And to me, it was Oklahoma. But Jalen Hurts had, 32 touchdowns, 8 picks, rushed for 20 more touchdowns. So he's that new kind of quarterback, if you will, that can beat you with his arm but can beat you with his legs. So I thought it was an interesting pick because right away everyone said Taysom Hill, Taysom Hill, Taysom Hill, that even though you have Wentz, you'll have a good backup in case Carson Wentz gets hurt. And if you're betting before the season starts, you're going to bet that Carson Wentz is going to get hurt. But B, if they can have a little package for him. I know Drew Brees wasn't happy when they started doing that in New Orleans, but he seems to accept it now. Certainly made them more diverse and better as a team. But the problem to me for Jalen Hurts is Taysom Hill is a big, strong rugby player type guy, and he takes a beating. I mean, he doesn't just come in to throw the ball. He runs a lot, and he takes a beating. So I don't know if Hurts can do that. I think it's an interesting pick, but just as with the Packers, a lot of people were saying, well, hold it now. The Eagles were decimated with injury last year. They could use another receiver. They took one at 21, or they could use a linebacker. They could use a DB. They have a lot of needs. And so another criticism was, of course, wow, you could have taken somebody other than a quarterback in the second round. What are your thoughts on that pick?
I mean, at first I was shocked, the collective NFL universe. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if yes, they try to keep him as a backup in the beginning. But you spoke on it before that Carson Wentz has been hurt multiple times in the past, pretty much ever since he's joined the league. I mean, yes, he had that MVP caliber type season where they did end up winning the Super Bowl, but Nick Foles ultimately took them on that playoff run, won the Super Bowl for them. But what would concern me more as a Phillies fan is, why am I not protecting my franchise quarterback? Because, you went out with that draft pick to have Carson Wentz be your guy for the next 10, 15, 20 or so years. Yeah. So it almost reminds me of the case of when the Colts, yes, I'm bringing up my Colts bias again, when the Colts first drafted Andrew Luck, because there was no protection, there's no weapons around him, no anything. And look at him now. Andrew Luck just kept getting – he's another big guy like Jalen Hurts, could take a beating. I mean, Andrew Luck, when he's mic'd up, you can hear him say, hey, nice hit, buddy, and everything. So on top of all that, but what the Colts finally realized, when they brought in Chris Ballard as a new GM, that we have to protect Andrew Luck. And when they started beefing up, they drafted Quincy Nelson and everything. They got the big offensive line. Andrew Luck had the best career the year before he retired. So I think if the Eagles would have went that route more, start beefing up the offensive line and the weapons around him would be better. Yes, it wasn't a offensive line or really even highlighted offensive, really protection-based draft, where it was more so weapons. I mean, big wide receiver class. We knew about that. A moderate quarterback class. I mean, we knew Joe Burrow was going to go number one. Tua and Herbert were flip-flopping in a million different mock drafts. So, I mean, it almost looks at a sense to where teams are looking to go after the best available pick in their eyes as opposed to what the team actually needs.
Yeah, pretty interesting. I think that's the takeaway on both of these picks. That is, both of these teams took quarterbacks. Both of these teams have quarterbacks, and they really did nothing to help the quarterbacks that they have, with an offensive lineman for Carson Wentz and for a wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. The biggest non-draft story, I think, in the last 10 days, without question, was the return of Gronk. Gronkowski's coming back, not surprisingly, playing at Tampa Bay. He said he'd never play with another quarterback other than Tom Brady. Brady and Gronk had 78 touchdown receptions, one to the other. I think it's like the fifth all-time in the history of the NFL, and it's with a tight end. What people didn't really know until the last year Gronk played is that he's a great blocker, and I think it was more the blocking on every play than anything he did as a tight end or even split out as a wide receiver tight end, which he could do for some incredible catches. I think he was just mentally and physically beat up. I think the physical part was more from the blocking. But I really thought last year he was going to come back. They were going to call him after 8 games or something. My son, the Patriots, not poor parent on my part. He was sure they were coming back. In fact, he had said to me years ago, they should just have Gronkowski come back for the last 4 or 8 games because he's always playing hurt. We actually went to one of the Giant Patriots Super Bowls. I'm a Giants fan. He's a Patriots fan. And on the first, not the 18-0 one, the other one, and on the first play of the game, he turned to me and said, yeah, Gronkowski can't even run. And even though he played in that Super Bowl, he couldn't even run. So I think it's a huge pickup for Tampa Bay. With a year off, your mind's going to be rested. Your body's going to be rested. You're playing with the guy you want to play. I think they're in the wrong division because New Orleans is great in the regular season, whatever. I don't know what happens to them in the playoffs, Stephon Diggs or non-pass interference calls or whatever happens, but they've lost horrifically the last 3 years. But I still think, Tampa Bay, I think they could be a playoff team now, and I think Brady's going to show Belichick, because the Patriots have really done very little. At least this first year, I think Tampa Bay is going to do better than the Patriots do. What are your thoughts on the Gronk addition to the Tampa Bay Bucks?
I stand completely on the opposite end of you, Steve. I think that, don't get me wrong, Tom Brady is a great quarterback, but I think that he flourished especially because he played with Bill Belichick in that Patriot offense, in that Patriot way, so to speak. Not saying that Tom Brady isn't a great quarterback, because he absolutely is, but I don't see him, especially now, because you look what the Buccaneers had to do to be relevant other than grabbing Tom Brady. You go and get Gronk, you go and get even more offensive weapons. This this Tampa Bay Patriots team now that I'm so-called dubbing it, and I guess this rest of social media is dubbing it as well. They remind me an awful lot of the LA Rams from, I believe it was 2 years ago, when they brought in Ndamukong Suh, just all these big names, star-studded, ego-driven players. And nothing against Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians is a great, fantastic NFL head coach, but there's too many egos, and you're bringing Gronk into one of the biggest party cities in the world. And Gronk's basically, I don't get me wrong, as much as I hate the Patriots, I love Gronk. I love watching Gronk play. He's a great character. He's a great guy, but Gronk's a big kid. That's all he is. He's a big kid, so he's gonna be kind of like a lost puppy dog, jumping around the water in Miami. So I think they'll definitely be in playoff contention. They'll definitely make the playoffs, but Super Bowl run, I don't really see it. I think they got a long way to go to beat the Saints. 49ers kind of tailed off a little bit. They had a couple key departures, just retire last year. So, but I think the Patriots, the Bucks they'll finish somewhere middle of the road in the playoffs. But then again, who knows? We all know if you never really count Tom Brady out. So that's my 2 cents. So
well, I'll just say this to wrap that part up. Brady's going to play 8 games in Tampa Bay if they have a full year, as opposed to 8 games in New England. That makes a big difference. He's got Mike Evans, who's the best receiver nobody knows in the NFL. He might be one of the 5 best receivers. And he's also got Goodwin, and he's also got Gronk, and he's also got the tight end, O.J. Howard, who might be traded. But my goodness, he's going to have more weapons than he ever had in New England. So I think if he plays exactly the same this year as he played last year, I think he's going to have a great season. And last year, everybody was questioning him. But you're right. We'll see what happens. You have a lot. It's funny you say that because you probably know Ndamukong Suh is on Tampa Bay this year.
Mm-hmm. They're just bringing all the studs. It's literally it's a Pro Bowl team. There's going to be too many egos, too many people who are going to want the ball. And I mean, who knows? I'm probably going to be completely wrong. You could have all these guys just shut up. We want to be that, the first team to host the Super Bowl, considering the Super Bowl is in Tampa this year, which is, I'm pretty convinced that I'm 150% convinced that's why Tom Brady chose to go to Tampa. Because he wants to add that other mantle on him and Peyton have always kind of lingered on that kind of who's better, where Brady always had the ring argument, but Peyton's always had that. They've always dubbed him, the greatest regular season quarterback. But that's a completely different argument. So I think Tom Brady just wants to elevate himself even more to being I led the team, or I hosted a Super Bowl and have a legit chance to win it.
Yeah, no, I think those are some good points. Well, we'll wrap up this video with just a brief word on the 3 quarterbacks picked in the top 6 picks. You're right. It was kind of expected. Joe Burrow, I thought he'd be number 1. I will say my podcast partner, Joe Stazak from ESPN Philly, thinks that Tua is like the greatest quarterback who ever lived. He said he thinks he's the best quarterback in the draft. Obviously, what Joe Burrow did, 60 touchdowns. But even more importantly to me, those last few regular season games and, of course, the playoff games, he was just so able to escape. And not just escape and run for 5 yards, but escape and make big plays down the field. I thought he was head and shoulders. I think he's going to be on his back the next year or 2 at Cincinnati. But you got to start somewhere. And he's an Ohio kid, as you know. Tua is interesting to me, but my 2 cents on Tua is he's closer to 6 feet than 6'1". Very few quarterbacks are Drew Brees. I mean, very, very few. Drew Brees being 6 feet, of course. And he's already brittle. He hasn't even gotten hit in an NFL game yet, and he's already brittle. So I think he's better than Justin Herbert. I think they went the way they should. Herbert 6 to the Chargers, 2 of 5 to the Dolphins. But I think he's going to have his problems. I think Joe Burrow is going to have his problems because of the team he's on. But I think generally, as you know, rookie quarterbacks, Peyton Manning early on was terrible. Eli wasn't very good. I think Troy Aikman was like 1 in 15 maybe, or 3 in 13 his first year. So it does happen. But just give me your quick final thoughts on the 3 quarterbacks in the first 6 picks.
I mean, you touched on everything pretty much exactly how we knew Burrow was going to go one. There was absolutely there was no shot that he wasn't going number one. It was just a matter of did the Bengals take him or did the Bengals somehow end up trading the number one pick. So we knew Burrow was going one. The biggest really story pre-draft was who was going to go first, Tua or Herbert, and we saw that Tua did going first at 5 to the Dolphins. But like we spoke about earlier, it really wasn't a QB heavy driven draft. It was more of a wide receiver type draft. But again, the three big guys who were in question, they landed exactly where we all expected.
Yeah. This is Steve Kallas speaking of sports along with Anthony Sorbellini. We'll see you the next time.